I love it.
So where did this whole thing start?
I mean, I think something that's interesting about my January 6th story and who I am as a J6 defendant is I'm pretty outside of the stereotype that fake news and lunacy media, as I like to call them, worked so hard to construct and to propagandize our country that there were these middle-of-the-country redneck racist hicks and terrorists ransacking the Capitol. So, I'm a pretty clean-cut guy from the West Coast and an actor and model. Normally, people in my field are very left-wing.
Right.
So that's just kind of unusual. But it's so important for people to understand what J6 actually is and why it became the thing that it became and how it's still being used. It wasn't just a day. It wasn't just a rally. It wasn't just a complaint about an election, right? It was sort of a flashpoint for a culmination of fascist infrastructure that has metastasized within our institutions over decades and decades, being grabbed and used for nefarious purposes, not so unsimilar or dissimilar to COVID, right? Where now we can look back and see that over time, these fascist type infrastructures or mechanisms were being laid down slowly where no one noticed, and then in a flash, suddenly they literally shut down the world and no one really said a peep about it. So there's a lot more to January 6th than meets the eye or even meets the mind at first, and it's really important to dig into what that is. My story, like I said, I was an artist from California and working in Hollywood. I got into the freedom fight to fight against lockdowns, became the creative director of a nonprofit called America's Frontline Doctors, and I'm still working actively for that organization. That's how I came to be in Washington, D.C. on J6, was as a colleague of the founder of the organization, Dr. Simone Gold, who was scheduled in advance to speak at a rally with a government-approved permit alongside many Congress people.
They're coming on the show, by the way, so I'm gonna meet her.
Yeah. So that's why I was there.
Wow.
I mean, most people were there simply to exercise their First Amendment right, as they should.
Right.
And as I'm so proud of them for doing. So I truly consider J6ers to be heroes of our time, because it was a very pivotal moment in 2020, and what happened with the election and many other things along those lines was deeply concerning. But it was not necessarily easy or popular to assemble at that time, and so the 1 million+ people that did, I consider to be some of the bravest and most engaged citizens that really care about our republic. So I'm grateful that they were there, and I was very proud to be a part of that moment in history.
So at what point in January 6th did you start seeing like, oh, this is not just, hey, we're just here hanging out? At what point did you start seeing police getting out of control? There started being some issues. So just full disclosure, I met Siaka yesterday. We hit it off. We hung out all night last night. But I haven't had the opportunity. I've talked to a lot of people that have talked to people, but I've never had an opportunity to talk to someone that was there.
Right.
And so I'd love to do two things. I'd love to talk about your experience there, what you actually experienced, not what we're told happened. Right. And then I'd love to talk about the aftermath as well. So what was your experience on that day? So
my experience was, I would say, fairly surreal in the sense that I now know, with the benefit of hindsight and video, etc., that there were some concerning indications and some moments of questionable behavior, whether that was protesters or whether it was government operatives, uniformed or otherwise. But some of that started happening perhaps around 11 o'clock. There was some sort of an insurgent group on the west side that gained entrance. I think those people were all dressed in black and have not been apprehended. Yeah. That's my understanding. But I was not aware of that at the time. So throughout the morning portion, which was when President Trump was speaking at the Ellipse, it was nothing other than the largest single gathering of humans I've ever witnessed in my life. And I literally mean that. I've been to lots of big rallies and so forth. This crowd blew your mind. People as far as you could see in every direction. I was right there in a VIP area, like basically 20 feet from the stage from President Trump speaking. but just around us, it was a sea of people. But it was a very optimistic, jovial, and purposeful sort of atmosphere, and everyone was very well behaved. So that's my experience of J6 in the beginning.
Okay.
Then I was part of a group that was scheduled to speak at the Capitol building, and the whole idea basically was that President Trump was speaking in the morning, as everyone knew, and then the idea was we're going to march, a protest march, like a symbolic march, up Constitution Avenue from the Ellipse to the Capitol building area for the afternoon set of speeches, which included, as I mentioned, many congresspeople and other national figures.
Wow.
More than a dozen speakers, a pretty impressive lineup, including Reps Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lance Gooden, Dr. Simone Gold, and many other people. So we walked to the Capitol for that purpose. Once we got there still wasn't anything problematic, but we couldn't find the stage, and we couldn't find the congresspeople and their entourage and organized security to direct what should have been a fairly well-produced afternoon speaking program.
Right.
So that's when things got a little weird, just in terms of it wasn't the plan. And then someone in our team said, we hear that they're trying to cancel the speech. And that didn't make any sense. That's essentially like planning the Super Bowl a year in advance. All the crowd gets there, they fill into the stadium, and then it's game time, and the ref comes up and says, the team didn't make it, so we're just going to have to cancel the Super Bowl.
Right.
I mean, that just wouldn't happen, but if it did, the crowd wouldn't just be like, okay, we'll go home.
Right.
Be like, no.
No, we pay for these tickets.
We pay for these tickets.
Here.
We planned all year. There's 100,000 people, or in this case in D.C., there was 1 million people there, literally. So it was just bizarre, and then it got a little more confusing then. But a crowd built up onto the steps of the Capitol, essentially just waving flags, praying, singing, protesting, and waiting for what was going to happen next. And then the doors got opened from the inside, and people got flushed through, myself included. But before the doors got opened up, there was a moment where the tenor, the feeling in the air, dramatically changed when flashbangs blew up. They sounded like grenades. It felt like a war zone. And the protesters, myself included, got freaked out. I mean, we were under attack, and we didn't realize it was coming or why it would be coming. There was no indication of why we should be attacked. We were just up on the stairs. Some people were pressed against the wall or the door. But, I mean, that's the extent of what was happening until suddenly we were under assault. So at that point, it got chaotic and crazy.
Of course.
I was stuck in that melee there in front of the door for maybe 10 minutes or so, and then the doors were open from the inside, and we got pushed in, and then we went on our basically 45-minute tour of the Capitol. Literally, through velvet ropes, calmly walking around, taking selfies, talking to people. I did not witness firsthand any actual vandalism or violence, with the exception of when I was outside. I saw one person try to bang on a window. That's the only example I can personally attest to having witnessed that was inappropriate. But I didn't see overt violence or people attacking anyone. I just saw a mosh pit, right? I was in a mosh pit. But we were largely excited and happy and pleasant until we got attacked by the cops, and then it was bizarre and confusing. But once I was in the building, I'm not going to say it was totally orderly all the time, but for the most part, it was quite calm and surreal. It felt like a high school field trip, in the Twilight Zone. But then there was smoke and tear gas, not actively shot at me at that time, but residue. So it was a bit weird, like, we don't really know what's going on here, but the cops are in the building and they're not telling us to go this way or that way. So we meandered around trying to find how to get out of the building. Eventually, some police officers told us, no, you can't come through this door, go back the way you came. So we did. Then Dr. Gold said, I came here to give my speech and there's no opportunity to do it. So if I'm going to do it, I should just do it now. Why not do it in the rotunda of the Capitol? Seems kind of
makes sense.
Meaningful.
You're there.
We're there. There was nowhere else to go. We literally couldn't figure out how to get out of the building yet. Her speech was 5 minutes long, so I shot it on a phone. And then some cops eventually said, hey, we're trying to clear the entrance so that you can get out. Would you try to make your way over there? And we did. And then we left. So that was my experience on January 6th. Standing on the steps after we exited, we stayed on the steps for another 45 minutes, just chatting with strangers to see what was their experience of the day. Largely a great day. Got weird for about an hour or two. Then we heard reports that someone got shot inside, which of course ended up being Ashley Babbitt, who was murdered. But at the time, we didn't see it. We just heard, and we thought, well, that's worrisome. But things have seemed to have settled down. The cops were then exiting the building, and people were just leaving. So it was a very long day, the majority of which was positive, peaceful, and as you would expect, with a couple of hours that got confusing and certainly chaotic.
Yeah.
And now we understand with hindsight why that happened. You know.
So what's the aftermath? So after this all happened, and by the way, I want to ask you so many follow-up questions,
Yeah.
but due to time, maybe we can schedule something more later.
Sure.
So all this happened, you're finished, you're at the steps, you're done. When did the government reach back out to you? When did things kind of get crazy after? When did you realize this is not over?
So we heard buzz the following 2 days, but we didn't understand that we should take it seriously because we call it fake news for a reason.
Almost like fear news.
Hyper-partisan, so we
Yeah.
expected them to gin up something out of nothing. So then we continued on our speaking tour. We had dates all up the East Coast that 2-week period. And so we finished our speaking tour, went back to Los Angeles, and then someone sent me the FBI's Most Wanted poster. And I was literally front and center
No way.
on the FBI's Most Wanted. But we took a look at the fine print, and it said, if you have any information about persons involved in violent or illegal activity, let us know. And obviously we could see our picture in the poster, but there was 20-some different folks, just random photos. And we assumed that they didn't necessarily know who was who, so they just threw it out there. But what they were seeking were people who were actively involved in vandalism or criminal activity.
Right. So you're like, it's not us.
It's not us.
We didn't do anything.
We did nothing.
Yeah,
So if
yeah.
they need to call us, they can call us, and we'll answer the phone.
Right.
Yeah, we were there. We were scheduled to be there, and all we did was walk around and give a speech. You know, like what's the issue? So, but no one called us. We were just working on a conference call with several colleagues on Martin Luther King Day. The irony does not escape me. January 18th of 2021, so 12 days later, and our lives were shattered forever. Door was obliterated by a battering ram. We were charged by
Are you at your home? Where are you right now?
a 2-bedroom condo with a home office in Beverly Hills.
Sorry, continue. So the battering ram.
Battering ram pulverized the door. Agents charge in with assault rifles, terrify us, have us get down on the ground, shackle us, throw us in cars, drive us to jail, separate us, deny me a phone call, then drag me to a federal detention center in Los Angeles, disappear me for a total of 4 days without ever having a phone call. And I might have been there for weeks if my co-defendant hadn't hired a private investigator to figure out where I was and then demand I be given an opportunity for bond, which eventually we resolved and I was taken out on bond. But it was insane. It was insane. It was my co-defendant has had PTSD legitimately from that experience. I know many other J6ers who have trauma.
How long were you in jail?
4 straight days when they first picked me up, and no one heard from me for 4 days.
Were you with anyone, or you were just by yourself?
I was held in isolation for that time.
You're in solitary confinement for 4 days. Did they read you your Miranda rights?
No.
So they didn't read you your Miranda rights. They didn't give you a phone call. They put you in solitary confinement for 4 days.
Yep. With
and
no word about
the
anything.
only way you got out was because of a private investigator your friend hired.
That's right.
We need to talk for an hour later. I have so many questions.
I mean, serious
Was this
civil
just
rights
off the
abuses
books?
just in the
Was
first
this just
4 days.
off the books? Like.
I mean, they had a warrant. So there are many people in the system that are complicit in the corruption and weaponization of our institutions.
And then it's so ironic that they do the same thing to Trump, and they're acting afraid, and that he's going to do it to them like they don't deserve it.
It's
So
frustrating
in
to
those
contemplate
4
what they
days-
deserve, but
We have 4 minutes. So in those 4 days, what were your thoughts? Like what? Like I mean, I'm
You know
sure
what?
it's just a complete whirlwind of just absolute emotion and just trying to figure it out.
yeah, there wasn't much to figure out. I was told nothing.
Jeez, dude.
I couldn't imagine it had anything to do with anything other than January 6th. But again, I literally did nothing wrong. I did my job. I'm not an unknown person. I'm a known person. My reason for being there was known and established in advance, part of a nonprofit that was scheduled to participate in a rally with a government-approved permit. They had 12 days to figure this out, call me and say whatever. So while I'm in prison, I was furious. My predominant emotion and sensation, I was so angry. So angry. I'm still angry. I mean, you should be furious at how
So what's
inexcusable that
justice
is.
look like at this point to you?
That is a great question. So, what does justice mean, right? Justice means restoring the victim and rehabilitating the offender. If those two things aren't happening, you're not getting justice. Right? So, the victims must be legitimately restored to the full extent that's possible. And some people died from January 6th. Innocent protesters died.
How many people do you know that are still in jail?
I don't know the number, but it's hundreds.
I'm going to ask you a question maybe you don't know. So obviously we know Joe Biden has dementia, and he probably, it doesn't even shock me if he doesn't even know this happened.
Yeah.
Like, just to be honest, like, I just don't know what he knows, doesn't know how evil he is or isn't. But
He's pretty evil, but
I
he's
know
also
that, but yes,
irrelevant at this
right.
point.
So during this whole time, who is the person, if you had to say, if we follow this chain down to this person or this group of people, I understand the left and the machine and all that kind of stuff, but in your mind, is there someone that's like, this is the person that needs to be held accountable for the actions of January 6th?
Yeah, Merrick Garland and Matthew Graves.
And who are they, for those that don't know?
Attorney General of the United States and Assistant Attorney General or Attorney General in the District of Columbia.
So justice would look like due process, fair trial for them, but with evidence and the opportunity. Because that's the thing, because we don't want to turn back into just a kangaroo court. Like, we need to give them a fair trial, but they need to be on trial.
I believe that.
And then we need to bring evidence, and that's the next steps for America. Do you think at this point that is a possibility?
It's very difficult. Officers serving in official capacity of the government are granted a very large amount of what's called immunity.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to comment too specifically on that because it's still debatable, and I think this was so egregious that they really need to be held accountable.
Yeah.
The manner in which that is realistically going to take place, debatable. Certainly, I think they need to be fully exposed, shamed, exiled. They should never. They should be held in complete and utter contempt by the American people broadly.
Yes.
Certainly, should never touch anything related to the government. I certainly think they should be named, sued, and charged heavily financially, as well as the department overall. There's more news on that coming, so stay tuned to johnstrand.com.
We'll do a follow-up podcast on that.
Yeah, but there's a lot more coming on that note. But yeah, justice needs to happen. So accountability, which is a necessary step towards rehabilitation for the offender. The idea is that you acknowledge what you did wrong, you make amends for it, and that restores your dignity as an offender. Now, I'm under no delusions.
Yes.
We're not going to get that from Merrick Garland and Matthew Graves. In my opinion, they are deeply corrupt, wicked people. And I don't expect that to change in this lifetime. But they'll answer to another judge.
Yes, sir.
But in general, we should be pursuing justice in the sense of both restoring the victim and rehabilitating offenders. So we should always have that intention and that priority in mind. I believe that's essential to justice, which is essential to our constitutional republic overall.
The last point I'll make, and we'll wrap up. First of all, thanks, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate you. Your team reached out to my show, and I really appreciate that a lot. Thank you for sharing. That's very, very kind. And I think the takeaway at the end of the day is this is why people need to be involved in politics.
100%.
People need to vote. People need to be aware of who's who, who's doing what, because for a long time the conservatives were asleep and not proactive; they were reactive.
Yes.
And it's time, and I'm a believer, I'm a Christian, and a lot of Christians are very quiet and timid with their beliefs.
And it's infuriating, to be honest.
And so that's where it's we actually need more sane people talking, not less sane people talking.
Right.
Which is why I even started doing politics in this podcast to begin with.
I love it, Dillon. You're saying the exact right thing. The book that I wrote in prison is called Patriot Plea. The foreword for the book is written by Eric Metaxas, who wrote an incredible, very short, easy-to-read book that everyone should read, Letter to the American Church. It speaks exactly to what you're talking about, and that's my passion. So the book that I wrote is not just a story of what I went through in prison, but it's my challenge to the country, my plea, that all of us as Americans understand what citizenship actually is, what it means. If you are in this country illegally, sorry, but you have to go.
Right.
If you are in this country legally, sorry, but you have a responsibility, and it's not
As
optional.
a citizen, exactly.
Right. And I talk about what that responsibility is, and it's my challenge to the country, so I hope people will read that book.
Awesome. So we'll promo that book for you. Can you give any social shout-outs or anything final as we wrap up the show that you want to do?
Absolutely. johnstrand.com. You can sign up for the book there and watch that crazy video. And at John Strand USA on X, Twitter, and social media.
Guys, I'm just going to share this last thing, as we do always in the podcast, because I've talked to Kyle, man, the Babylon Bee. Like, that's why I got connected with him. And so this is not my
Amazing.
first run-in with this topic. The beautiful thing of having real, authentic conversations is you go to the source.
Yeah.
You ask questions with people that are actually there.
That's journalism.
And that's what it looks like. And so appreciate you guys listening along. I'm sure if you have questions, you can follow them on socials and all that kind of stuff. John,
DMs are open.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you a lot.
Thank you, Dillon.
for sharing your story.
Amazing.
All right,
God
thanks,
bless you guys.